So it's been a couple weeks now since The Rise of Skywalker was released, and there's been a huge amount of reviews, of course, on YouTube, and the vast majority of which are very negative. Although there were a couple that I've seen that were positive, and I've been watching every review that I can find on this movie, just because, it left me in a very kind of depressed and disappointed state, and it by far is the disappointment of 2019 for me. Now, regardless of how you feel about The Last Jedi, most of the reviews that I saw were very negative toward that movie, and I'll talk about that movie a little bit in this review, but since I couldn't upload when this movie was released, I just wanted to kind of put my thoughts out there anyway, even though this is pretty late, and I really do appreciate everybody tuning in for this, even though it's so late. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. But I kind of want to go through the film, starting with the, crawl. Now, going into this movie, from the trailers, I only saw like one or two trailers, but when you get the Palpatine laugh in that trailer, I'm like, geez. I personally really hate it when they bring a character back from the dead in subsequent movies. It just makes, it's just needless retroactivity. You didn't need to bring him back here. So I was thinking, okay, maybe it's just gonna be like some sort of like dark side presence or something cool like that, or maybe it's gonna be like an old recording of his, and when they go to seek it out, it's gonna be like he's not gonna be actually there. Oh, but nope, in the freaking crawl, the very start is Palpatine's back, and I'm like, oh god, the second that happens, I sunk in my seat. My wife turned to me and she's like, I'm sorry. But I thought, okay, so this is happening, this is what we're getting, let's see how they execute it, let's see what they're gonna do with it, and hopefully they bring it through to at least some sort of satisfaction. But Palpatine's back, and Kylo Ren is basically on a quest to find him. And I thought this first sequence was pretty interesting. It was a montage, and he's going through and attacking people. But I'm thinking, okay, like, who are these people that he's attacking? And why does he need, like, are they protecting this Wayfinder? And the whole movie, like, the whole first half of the movie is just like a fucking ADD trip, and I'm thinking, okay. So first off, light speed skipping. Now this is kind of the first, I don't know if you would call it a retcon, but a re-evaluation of things Last Jedi did with the light speed tracking, which I thought was really interesting and brought a whole new level of potential tension that you can have between the Resistance and the First Order. But practically the first scene of the movie is like, oh no, J.J. Abrams and what's the writer's name? Chris Terrio? Is that the other writer? The dude that wrote Batman v Superman. They're like, oh, we don't want to put the effort into thinking a way around that. So we're just gonna kind of create this whole thing, which actually, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think in The Force Awakens, they made it a point to how difficult and dangerous actually light speeding into a planet's atmosphere is. And I think they do it like multiple times, and they almost do it into a monster's mouth, and it's just so over the top. It's fun to watch, don't get me wrong, but the second you think about it a little bit, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And who knows, maybe Poe can do it because, I don't know, it's a smaller ship than like a Corellian Corvette or something like that, but I don't know, it just raises a lot of questions like so many other things in this film. But thinking about like how quickly cutting and how fast paced this first part is, it's like an ADD trip. I might have some degree of ADD, and my wife actually thinks that I do, undiagnosed, of course. I haven't seen a doctor about it or anything, but I was thinking, oh my god, will you please stop cutting? Like, the editing in this movie just really took me out of it for the first large chunk of it, because it was just like little tiny snippets of scenes, And one in particular was when Kylo was pointlessly reassembling his helmet. And I'm like, okay, well, that's the first kind of, I don't know, middle finger to the Last Jedi when he smashed it. And I thought that was a great progression of his character. He's like, okay, you know what? I'm going to just move on from this. You know, Snoke yelled at me about it, but I'm going to kind of move on and be my own character and not follow in Darth Vader's, you know, shadow anymore. I am Kylo Ren and I am the supreme leader. So him putting his helmet back on just felt entirely pointless, especially since he just gets rid of it. It's like not even in the movie. So you have this little 10-second scene. This whole movie came off as like a Saturday morning cartoon. In terms of the plot, it's like you can see the writing while the film was progressing. You can actually see the writing, and that's really bad when the writing is so bad that it takes you out of the movie. It draws attention to itself, and that's something that, you know, when the sound design draws attention to itself, that's not good sound design, because you want the sound design to flesh out and make the whole scene more fully realized so that you're immersed in what's going on. But when the sound design draws attention to itself, boom, you're realizing that you're watching a movie and that you can't suspend your disbelief anymore because that sound design really drew attention to itself. So now you're seeing this writing, it's like, okay, let's do this, and then this will be cool, let's do this, and things just kind of happen just because. And so Kylo Ren gets his helmet assembled just because, and let's have these red lines in it just because. And it's like, okay, so we'll bring Palpatine back because that's just cool, a cool thing to do, and he'll be cool. And, you know, it really came off as a Saturday morning cartoon or maybe like a comic book. Now, Palpatine returned in the comic books, but that was okay because, you know, it was a comic book. It wasn't like an actual part of the... it might have been a part of the, you know, quote unquote canon, but being a comic book, you have that extra separation so that you can suspend your disbelief a little bit more. And you know, it's a little bit, it can be a little bit more fantastical. Well, this kind of brought that in and made it into like a Transformers or superhero movie, as opposed to a more subdued Star Wars film, which, you know, there is no restraint in this movie. They can just do whatever and just because, and you're just, you know, supposed to go through it, which is entertaining enough in itself. But going back to this first few scenes, it's just cutting way too fast, like ADD. So Kylo Ren finds Palpatine, and Palpatine is literally just like standing against a wall. He's just in this corner, and it's so poorly lit. The lighting in this whole scene was way too dark. I couldn't even tell what's going on. And Palpatine's just kind of standing there, and I'm like, okay. So him being back here brings up so many questions, you know. The Force Awakens didn't answer any questions. The Last Jedi answered a bunch of questions, and a lot of people were unsatisfied with those answers. And now this movie should be a wrap-up to everything. It should be answering questions, not saying, okay, here's this, that's going to raise 1,000 more questions. So how did Palpatine survive? Why is he back? Why is he deciding now is a good time to come back? There's just a lot left to assumption. So I'm assuming that he's back because the Force kind of awakened in Rey, and so now he wants Rey, but his plan doesn't make sense at all. He wants her dead, but then he wants to inhabit her power at the end of the movie, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But then, like, at the end, like, her and Kylo Ren are together and they have this dyad, and he's like, oh, I'm just gonna suck the life force from you out of nowhere, and now I'm super uber powerful and I have all this. It's just so convoluted and does not make sense in the slightest. Like, if he's supposed to be some sort of mastermind where, you know, he made Snoke, which, you know, I kind of liked that Snoke was a clone of Palpatine in so much as that it was kind of an answer for where Snoke came from. And, you know, it literally could have been one line. I would have actually liked it more if Snoke originally was somebody who helped Luke establish the new Jedi, training academy, and he was lured in by the dark side, became the dark side, and became the leader of the First Order, and started all that trouble there. But no, he's just a clone of Palpatine, which raises another question. Okay, why did you use Snoke as a clone? Like, what was going to happen to your plan if Snoke succeeded and took over everything? It just makes everything so incredibly convoluted. So, and also, if the Emperor was alive this whole time, why didn't he just say, "Hey, I'm not dead. Let's just continue the fight between the Empire and the Rebellion." The Empire wasn't gone after that. I mean, obviously the loss of the Emperor is what kind of helped the downfall of the Empire. So why did he stay away and just let the Empire kind of crumble into obscurity and let the new Republic rise up? If he had just stayed alive and leading the Empire would have stayed strong, and they would have dragged the war out for a much longer period of time, maybe even made another Death Star successfully, and maybe a Starkiller base much earlier on. So it just raises so many questions. Like, why didn't he do that? Why did he go to this planet Exegol? And it just does not make any sense at all. It's dumb. And, I've heard so many people in their reviews saying, well, it's dumb, but really, where did you expect it to go after what The Last Jedi left off? Can you really blame them after that travesty? And everybody's just using their reviews as an excuse to complain about The Last Jedi more. And it's like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, they killed off Snoke, so how are they gonna get a villain back? He was the main villain. No, Snoke was not the main villain. He was not the main antagonist. He was the leader of the First Order, and that's it. Kylo Ren killed him, ergo Kylo Ren is now the leader of the First Order. Kylo Ren is the main villain of this whole trilogy, and so is the First Order. So, just because Snoke is more powerful than Kylo Ren does not mean that he's the main villain, So, in my eyes, The Last Jedi left, it was practically handed to JJ and Chris Terrio on a freaking silver platter. You have Kylo Ren, the Knights of Ren, which are complete waste in this whole trilogy because of this movie. And you have the First Order and the freaking Resistance, who are just a few dozen members. And then, of course, you have obvious supporters throughout the galaxy, but they don't have the hope that they need to continue. And that's what the point of the final scene in The Last Jedi was what Luke Skywalker did at the end of The Last Jedi against all those, against the First Order and Kylo Ren, that helped to propel hope throughout the galaxy, which would then spark people to start rising up against the First Order. So you had that storyline that you could have followed. You could have still had Kylo Ren be redeemed at this if it was executed in a better way. But yeah, you had him and the Knights of Ren as a main villain, and for the First Order. I don't understand why people think that left off at such a dead end. It left off with what are these good guys gonna do to overcome this? Well, in this movie, they decide to brush that aside and say, oh, well, the Resistance is really strong now. They're not as fledgling they were before, and now we have light speed skipping, so we're just gonna kind of forget about the light speed tracking, which could have added a lot of attention to this storyline, but instead you decided to focus so much attention on bringing Palpatine, who should be irrelevant and makes no sense and raises so many questions, and it just makes this whole thing so convoluted and so dumb. And even just kind of retroactively undoes Luke Skywalker's sacrifice at the end of the last movie. If you were disappointed in his death, you should be even more disappointed now, because it didn't amount to anything. Because why would people want to be inspired by Luke Skywalker to rise up against the First Order when there's Lando Calrissian, the ex-administrator of Cloud City, to go and spread hope off screen so that everybody can have an Avengers Endgame moment? Oh my god. And that could have given Finn a really good arc too, especially with the ex-stormtroopers that they meet a little bit later on, which ultimately was pointless. They could have just, like, them being ex-stormtroopers amounts to literally nothing. You know what would have been awesome if Finn kind of had a scene or went on kind of a mission, maybe with Poe and maybe Rey too, to kind of try to turn some stormtroopers, since he has been there and he knows what it's like, to kind of go and rally hope from them to turn against their, the dictatorship of the First Order or whatever. But nope, that just amounted to nothing. It's one of almost every little plot line of this movie is just an idea that they just do not flesh out or do not delve into. It's mentioned and then forgot about. It's an extreme case of surface level writing. So after all that, I thought certain parts of that whole first sequence was interesting. I think the whole entire Palpatine thing drags the movie just into the depths of the dark side, so to speak. So we go back to the good guys with Rey and Poe and Finn and all those guys. So she learned, she's learning from the books and she's training, and I liked the sequence of her training. I think, again, it just shows very little restraint. It's like, we gotta move fast, we gotta be intense and adrenaline rush. We have to have her meditating. Oh, but it's gonna be boring and we're gonna lose the audience if she's just sitting there meditating. So let's have her floating in the air and having some big rocks floating with her. So I actually didn't mind that too much. It just kind of played into the whole ADD, the lack of restraint from this movie. And it actually felt like a lot of, if you're familiar with Michael Bay's work, this kind of reminded me a lot of that stuff. So after Rey's training, which I kind of liked that Leia was kind of, showing her the ropes a little bit more. I enjoyed that sequence, and it kind of helped to kind of strengthen the bond between Rey and Leia. And I actually liked the relationship dynamic between Poe and Rey. They kind of had a little bit of a argument kind of thing, almost kind of similar to Han and Leia's dynamic in Empire Strikes Back and A New Hope, but it went nowhere. They didn't do anything with it. It was just there because it's like, okay, well, it'll be fun to have them kind of quip back and forth a little bit and have this little opposing opinions about stuff, but it was overall pointless because it never went anywhere. There was never any kind of closure to that or any kind of mutual respect kind of thing going on. They just kind of go on this adventure, and it's overall just kind of a pointless adventure, albeit it is fun to watch them. It's nice having them together going on an adventure and fighting stormtroopers, and very conveniently falling into this quicksand where Finn is like, Rey, I have something to tell you, and it's like, okay, it better be important, like, confessing your feelings for her. A lot of people thought that this was what he was going to say, which makes the most sense. But then a lot of people are saying that J.J. Abrams actually had come out and said that Finn was going to tell her that he's force sensitive. So in this situation, in what world would that help their situation, telling her that he's force sensitive now? Thinking that they're gonna die, but extremely conveniently, and this plays into the plethora of plot contrivances that this movie has. And I think this might be the first fake out death that they have out of I think I counted 5 fake out deaths. They very conveniently find this dagger that this dude Palpatine hired to kill Rey's parents. And we'll get into that too. Oh god, this video might be really long. But they very conveniently find that, and we have this injured worm there so that we can set up force healing, which I actually really liked the integration of this force healing ability with this, but again, with the no restraint, she's just like kind of feeling her wrist. It's like, okay, so this ability is now overpowered, especially when we see it later. Like if she had passed out or something like that, when or like felt, weakened from just this cut, then it would have been much more impactful later when she heals Kylo Ren, and then when it would have made sense when he dies later on, kind of bringing her back to life. But now it's just like, oh, my wrist hurts a little bit from healing this very big gash on this worm, and then they find this stupid dagger. The whole plot of this first part, while it was fun to watch, when you think about it just a little bit, it's just the more I think about this movie, the more I dislike it. Even though it definitely can be entertaining, the editing that I talked about earlier really took a lot of the entertainment value out of it for me, because it just couldn't settle in and let us soak in what's happening. So this is where they actually meet Lando Calrissian, and I'm really happy that he's in this movie. I do wish that he had a little bit more to do or offer. Even though he does something really big later on, that is actually a big gripe that I have with this movie, and we'll talk about that when he gets there. But Lando Calrissian being here was really interesting, and it's interesting that they integrated a story with Luke and him kind of searching for this Wayfinder to try to find Palpatine, because somehow they knew that he was alive, even though he hadn't started his broadcast yet. You know what would have been way more interesting is that if they somehow found out that Palpatine was cloning himself to be resurrected, and the movie is about them preventing that from happening, because they know how dangerous Palpatine is, and after killing Snoke, they want to keep that kind of victory away, even though Kylo Ren is still a threat, and the Knights of Ren are still a threat. And I believe we do see those guys on this planet, and God, they're a pointless addition to the overall trilogy. One thing that they actually kind of expanded on from The Last Jedi in this movie was Rey and Kylo's Force bond. Now, it might be a little much for people to kind of believe, and this movie asks a lot of the audience to like, you have to really suspend your disbelief a lot in this, because there is no subtlety to it, there is no restraint, and their Force bond, whereas there was a little bit of moisture from their last Force bond in The Last Jedi, this one we're just straight up teleporting objects. And he gets this necklace, has it analyzed, and what do you mean by analyzed? What does that mean? Like, how does analyzing a necklace tell you where it's from? Is it just like the composition of it, like the type of materials, type of rocks or metals that it's made up of? But at any rate, that's just how it happens, and that's how he finds out they're there, and they get into the big chase, and he shows up, and Rey senses his presence. So this leads to more convoluted plotline where Rey, for some reason, decides to go out in the middle of the desert to face down a freaking starship, and Chewbacca gets captured, which I'll talk about in a second. But and of course Finn is there just yelling Rey over and over again. Like, he doesn't really have a character in this, even though it feels like they tried to do something with him, and they could have done something extremely interesting with him, but they just failed to do so because they just want to throw a bunch of shit in here that they think that fans will be happy with. So Rey goes in, and instead of shooting Rey, Kylo Ren is just flying towards her, as we saw, I think it was the first trailer. And even then, I thought it was kind of an awkward scene of her just like running away from it and then doing that cool jump. And so, that happens. And instead of, is he at this point, he's trying to kill her, right? So why isn't he shooting her? If anything, he should have shot her, and she should have deflected it with a lightsaber or something, instead of just having this really awkward trying to run her over like it's a car or something. It's like, geez, man, like, okay, you're a really good pilot, because getting down that low to the ground is really difficult, especially in a starship going at those speeds. But she flips over, cuts his wing off, and then he crashes, and then he's just walking away from the wreckage completely unscathed. And it's like, oh, okay, so are you a force vision or something? How the hell are you completely undamaged from this? It would have been way better if he ejected from it before it crashed. That would have made so much more sense. God, but it just plays into the utter lack of stakes in this entire movie. And Finn gets her attention that the transport has captured Chewie, and this whole plot line is dumb. Another dumb plot line where she and another just like superhero move, like we aren't Jedi anymore, we're just straight up superheroes with massive telekinetic powers. She stops the transport. Now that should require a butt ton of energy and power, but I do appreciate that, because everybody calls Rey a Mary Sue, and I feel that this movie attempts to kind of rein that in a little bit and say, hey, okay, she's learning a lot and she's training, and look, Kylo Ren is also powerful. So if they were going with the direction of the Force ability is kind of spreading amongst the more powerful Force users, so like all of the power is going into Rey and Kylo, and obviously Palpatine too, so Rey would have like as much power as Kylo and Palpatine. I mean, it's might make sense, I don't know, but anyway, I'm glad that he at least stopped it, and that sequence was pretty tension filled, especially when Chewie was on it, but I feel like it would have been just as tension filled if they only had the knife, which the good guys needed, and not have this stupid fake out death. and then of course they're playing into like Rey's anger and stuff, and it's like, okay, so do you only have anger issues because of Palpatine? Palpatine's inheritance? Because, why can't she just be her own person and have frustration and anger? Why can't she just have a tragic past? We'll talk more about that in a second. But when she does the Force lightning, which is obvious foreshadowing for Palpatine, who I think Snoke did the Force lightning in the last one. But other than that, he's the only one who's done Force lightning in the series of the movies, I think. But anyway, she does that and blows the ship up, and I'm like, that is some really strong Force lightning. But then again, this movie just like takes Jedi powers and puts them on steroids. So Daisy Ridley's, when she screams Chewie, I almost laughed out loud, because she just kind of squeals it. And I'm hearing a lot of people saying that they should have left, like, this is how they should have killed Chewie. And I'm like, no, like, what are you thinking? This is, like, to kill him off in such an unceremonious way after such a contrived way of getting him and these characters into this position to get to just this point to blow up that ship. Only for it to amount to nothing at all, other than to have a slight foreshadowing that she's Palpatine's daughter, or granddaughter. And actually, I think what's his name? Freaking Count Dooku. He also did Force lightning. So is she related to him too? But anyway, it turns out the Sith dagger, for some reason Chewbacca had it with him instead of leaving it with Poe and Finn, and now he's just in the First Order. He's a prisoner of the First Order, and oh my god. And the Knights of Ren are there, and they're just watching him, and it's like, okay, so what are there, 5 or 6 Knights of Ren, and there's three Rey, Finn, and Poe, and then there's Chewbacca, but you would have 3 against 5 or 6 of them. So what's their goal? Like, what are the Knights of Ren doing? They're just like kind of wandering around. Why show them in the movie at all? They serve zero purpose. other than to have something for Kylo Ren to fight as a good guy at the end. So, freaking, it seems like everything that happens in this movie, there is something either major or minor wrong with it. You know, it's just like a little kid bashing his freaking action figures together and saying, okay, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then, ooh, it would be cool if this happens, but I gotta get the Rey and Poe and Finn there first, so we have to, ooh, it'd be cool if they were in quicksand. And speaking of, why, when they were being chased by the stormtroopers, why didn't Rey like throw her lightsaber at them? It was showing that she had like lightsaber throw ability, so that would have been really cool to see there. And also, why did she have that lightsaber in the first place? It was destroyed in the last movie. I guess she picked it up, but did I miss something in the last movie? Did she pick it up and after she left? Maybe she did, but anyway, it's repaired and it's back. I think it would have been really cool, since there's been a time skip, if she had built her own, you know, lightsaber at this point, and she had the yellow lightsaber throughout this movie. I thought that would have been a really cool thing to do, even though she's still, you know, training. Even though I don't know why she needs to train, she just seems all powerful, you know. And it would have been really cool. Like, everybody calls her a Mary Sue, but what it really would have rounded it out is if they explained that, okay, yeah, she's really powerful in the Force, but she doesn't, like, it comes to her in bursts, like when she needs it. It comes in times of need, you know, and it comes out kind of in an uncontrolled way. So what she needs to do is learn how to harness it and control it. But it seems like she's been in pretty good control this whole time, except for the Force lightning stuff. And also, if she can freaking pull a giant spaceship, like, what's to stop her from doing that to, like, small, like, stormtroopers or the little speeders that they were tracing them with? So they all end up leaving in the Sith dude, the dude that Emperor Palpatine hired in his ship. And they decide to, because they don't have the knife anymore, but luckily 3PO has it in his memory, and he can translate the Sith. Here's another weird thing. 3PO can translate it, but he can't translate it. So it's like, why are you able to understand it if you are not able to block it? Like, if we remember, Anakin Skywalker is the one who built 3PO. So who is the one who put the Sith language in him in the first place? And then who was the one who came in after to block that ability from him and make it so that if you modify it in any way, he loses his memory? So kind of weird. But I do actually kind of like 3PO's role in this movie. I did appreciate the attempt, at least, to give him a bigger role here and a more important role. And actually, you know, I didn't like it from the trailers, but I actually kind of liked it here, where he's like, yeah, you know, we've been on this adventure together. These are my friends, and I'm going to sacrifice myself for my friends. It is yet another kind of quote-unquote fake-out death, because 3PO just has a backup, which they do foreshadow. But I think it would have been better if he just, like, had his memory refreshed. So they go to, what's her name, Zori something or other, Poe's old friend, and we get a little bit of backstory for Poe, which is kind of neat, even though it was also kind of pointless. It was nice to have a little bit of backstory, but since they don't do anything with it and it amounts to basically nothing, it doesn't develop anything. So I don't know. It was kind of a nice dynamic, I suppose you could say, to have Poe and then this Zori girl who just, you know, likes Rey just because it's Rey. She's like, oh, I like her. we fought a little bit. I like her. I'll help. So I don't know, maybe if they were under attack and then Rey saved them and then she like owes them one, but that would have given a little bit more reason to why she would help them. Other than it being Poe, but it seemed like she might have wanted to kill Poe. You know what would have been really cool is if she went in to attack Poe and then hugged him instead, kind of like Lando and Han in The Empire Strikes Back. That would have been neat. But anyway, they go, and then the Babu Frick little alien creature guy does the memory thing with 3PO, and he kind of gives the way to the wayfinding coordinates to wherever they're supposed to go, which ends up being the wreckage of the Death Star wreckage. And it's like, oh, like, what? Has nobody looked? I mean, obviously, people have said it, and it's an obvious thing. How did this giant piece of wreckage survive? And are there other pieces of wreckage? Also, the Death Star was above the moon of Endor, so how did it end up here? And this whole thing was very confusing, but I just kind of went along with it. I'm like, all right, well, whatever. It's kind of neat. We're gonna be on this wreckage, and even though like the way there is still convoluted plot. So they end up going to their Death Star wreckage, and through another pointless. There's another character. I forgot her name because she is more or less a pointless addition. Her backstory is pointless. She is kind of like Finn in that she left the First Order as a stormtrooper. They all threw down their arms when they were ordered to like kill civilians or something. And okay, this had a lot of potential here because, you're trying to. Because at the end of the last movie, they're like, okay, well, Luke Skywalker has inspired hope in the galaxy so that they can, get the courage to rise up against the First Order. Because the First Order had taken over at that point, like almost completely. They destroyed the New Republic in The Force Awakens and continued their conquest to take over the rest of the galaxy in The Last Jedi. And so what Luke Skywalker did was inspire hope in the people. So then this movie, what it should have done is carry on from that, and like that should have been a large part of this story and this mission, is inspiring hope in all these other worlds across the galaxy. And Finn and this girl and these other guys, these other ex-stormtroopers would have played a vital role in that, because there are obviously other stormtroopers out there that might feel the same way, that are ordered to kill civilians and do like really bad things in the name of the First Order. And it would have been like such a great character, I don't know if you would call it arc, but a great thing for Finn's character to do, instead of him just being along for the ride. And just, they don't really say anything of any importance in this. Poe and Finn, all of the dialogue is just nothing dialogue. There's no depth to it. It doesn't service the characters in any way. It doesn't help to progress them. It only is in service to the plot and the contrivance of it. So man, it's such a missed opportunity there, because it just amounts to nothing. So it's more or less pointless for these people to be ex-stormtroopers. Although it's an interesting idea, I suppose. So they say that it's too dangerous to go out to the wreckage of the Death Star because of the giant waves, and Rey, who has essentially been raised on a desert planet and probably doesn't even know what an ocean is, just like perfectly sails this thing across the water and gets there. It doesn't seem like she has too much trouble with it. Which it does seem in this movie like they tried to make her seem like she was putting in an effort in terms of her facial expressions and her acting and stuff like that, which I did appreciate to a degree, but they're just, I don't know, there wasn't any actual like resistance for her to overcome, so I think this whole Death Star thing might be my favorite part of the movie. Because it is focused on Rey and Kylo Ren, and I think what a lot of people would agree with would be that these two characters are definitely the strongest. Their whole relationship is the strongest part of this whole trilogy, and for me especially, it's Kylo Ren. And I really think that this trilogy should have focused a lot more on him, and this movie especially should have focused a lot more on him and his progression toward the light, so to speak, because it's very sudden here, and it's about as sudden as Anakin's turn to the dark side in Revenge of the Sith. So Although I did really enjoy this, I enjoyed seeing her in the Death Star wreckage. It was interesting to see that setting, because we haven't really seen that kind of setting in a Star Wars movie before. This kind of like shipwrecked wreckage, even though it doesn't make sense because that Death Star was just completely obliterated, and any chunks I don't feel like should have survived, especially not in that ocean with it shifting and then the knife lining up with it just like perfectly. I completely forgot. See, that's how convoluted the whole story of this movie is. I don't know, I can't remember which scenes come before which other scenes. So they get this coin from Zori, which they use a little bit later. Kylo Ren has a Force bond with Rey. And in terms of the Force bond usage in this movie, I initially had it was really overkill, but then again, everything in this movie is overkill, so it didn't really bother me to a large extent with the necklace grabbing. And then then they have a lightsaber battle a little bit later, but here he finds out where she is again through this Force bond. And he basically brings the Wayfinder to them, or the dagger to them, and they end up going up to the Star Destroyer, using the coin to kind of sneak aboard, and they just start kind of blasting away, and they're blasting the cameras, and Rey splits off to go to Kylo Ren's quarters while Kylo Ren is down on the surface. So that was kind of an interesting twist there with him just trying to find her and get to her again. But then they have this a Force bond again, and then they have just a full-on lightsaber fight. And the Force bond is like, how is this thing work? Is it like a sphere around them where it's just kind of random objects will teleport to one another? Who knows? I thought it was interesting. It was fine. And they talk about Rey's parents. And this is like, so she's a Palpatine. She is Palpatine's granddaughter. And, how much better would it have been if she was just trying to struggle and overcome the fact that she had such a tragic backstory of her parents abandoning her for drinking money? Like, wouldn't that be like a kind of scarring thing that you would need to try to overcome? But no, it's, we need to make it less interesting and say her parents loved her and were trying to protect her. But then the stupid freaking Sith Hunter guy killed them right on Jakku, even though she was right there, and he just left. Like, did he not search that general area for her? So the whole plot line is dumb and just retroactively makes things so much worse. This movie does a lot of that. It just retroactively makes things worse for every single other movie before it. So also whilst on the ship, they discover that Chewbacca is still alive. Oh, that's surprising. They didn't really have much of a reaction or moment to grieve after they thought he was dead. Like, one of their best companions just died, and Rey freaking killed him, and Finn was like, "It's okay, it wasn't your fault." And I'm like, "Yeah, it was. You just force lightning the ship out of existence. It was entirely your fault." But anyway, she splits off, and they have this lightsaber fight, and he discovers that she is in his quarters. And yeah, this is when the lightsaber duel happens, and Darth Vader's helmet transports to him on the surface, and he discovers that she's in his quarters. And this is when he reveals, in the clunkiest way possible, like riveting dialogue here, your parents were nobody, but because they chose to be. And it's like they're trying to pull from a certain point of view, even though it's so much more clunky than that and raises so many other questions. And it just, that's another moment when I just sunk in my seat. And this is my second biggest gripe with the movie. First is the Palpatine BS, and number two is Rey not being a nobody, because her parents loved her and just wanted to protect her. Yeah, but it raises so many other questions. Like, who were her parents? Like, were they force sensitive? If they were force sensitive, like, why was this guy able to just capture them and kill them so easily with a freaking knife? They must not have had force power. So what is it? Skip a generation or what? And it's almost like they're trying to give an excuse for Rey to have power, they're trying to give an excuse for as why Rey is so strong in the Force is because she's Palpatine's granddaughter. And it's like, all right, well, I understand with like the Skywalkers, it's kind of hereditary with how powerful the Force is with them, I guess. Even though it's just Anakin, Luke, and Leia. So I don't know if I really buy Palpatine's genes being the sole reason for her power. I think, man, it's just so clunky, and it could have been explained in a much easier and more digestible way. So I was just, at this, I'm just trying to enjoy what I'm watching this movie, but the movie keeps doing things that just like snap my brain on to give it some extra attention, because this stuff just doesn't make sense. It doesn't click. So yeah, the good guys are captured except for Rey because she's in Kylo Ren's quarters. And freaking Hux comes in and saves them, and he says, "I'm the spy." Oh my God. My wife liked this movie a lot, but even she admits that this is a bad line. He just comes right out and says it. And it's like, why is he referring to himself as the spy? Like, does he know of other spies? Or does he know that there aren't any other spies? And he should have said, like, I'm the one who gave you information earlier. And the motivations for this are just comical. This is like freaking Hanna-Barbera cartoon here. He doesn't like Kylo Ren and wants to see him fail. Therefore, he's willing to sacrifice the entirety of the First Order and help his bitter enemies against it. You know what would have been much more interesting if, a lot of people make him into a bumbling fool or think that he's made into a bumbling fool from The Last Jedi. And I can definitely see that. And I felt like it was more in the presence of Kylo Ren than it was him as a character himself. So I think, what's his name? General Pride, who kind of takes over. He's like an old school dude who was in the army in the Palpatine days. He's literally just not a character. He's just a stern general guy who won't take no BS. That could have very easily been Hux in that role, and the spy could have been just like another stormtrooper that was defecting like Finn did. And this is another reason why Finn's story of rallying the stormtroopers against the First Order would have been a much better plotline to go after. But anyway, he says, "I'm the spy," lets him go, and then gets shot. And then his story's over. So much for that character, I guess. See, that's the thing about this movie, is that a lot of people I've heard actually, they're blaming this movie's shortcomings on The Last Jedi. And I'm like, well, no, I mean, you could have, followed those stories and kind of expanded on them and wrapped them up in a satisfying way, instead of saying, oh shoot, well, he's a bumbling idiot now, better kill him off. So you didn't need to follow the bumbling idiot platform. He could have still been a great leader, except when it came to Kylo Ren, and him being against Kylo Ren makes a lot of sense. He could have been working behind the scenes and did something else against Kylo Ren, which actually helps Kylo Ren get pushed toward the light side. So, God, man. Couldn't they have gotten somebody else to write this, for God's sake? So back on Endor, and if we remember, the second Death Star was above Endor's moon. I want to say it was its fourth moon. I might be thinking of Yavin 4 though. But anyway, we get onto the wreckage, and she finds, oh my god, the dagger. This is just laughable. They just happen to be standing at the exact right spot for the dagger to line up with the contours of the ship's wreckage. Oh my god, like it's a mountain or something. You know, if it was a mountain, maybe it would make more sense, but this is so stupid. Oh my god. I just can't even. I can't even. But, okay, anyway, she finds the freaking Wayfinder on the wreckage, and then Kylo Ren shows up, and they fight. Oh, but before that, she sees, like, what, a dark side vision? Why are we supposed to, like, how are we supposed to believe that Rey would turn to the dark side? Because, oh, it's another hereditary thing. Palpatine's granddaughter, she must be a part of the dark side, which is another question. Why wasn't her parents, her father or mom, whatever, I think it was probably her dad, I think, why wasn't he on the dark side? Why wasn't he super powerful with the Force, doing freaking Force lightning into spaceships? You know? Excuse me. But she has this stupid Force vision, which is, I felt like it was only there to put in the trailers to make people go, oh, I wonder how that's gonna play out. But she just stumbles backwards, and that's the end of it. After she has like these sharp teeth. You know, I understand like Rey is kind of having conflicting emotions about being Palpatine's granddaughter, but how much does she really know about Palpatine? She has zero personal connection to him. Does she eat, like, not that long before this, she thought Luke Skywalker and all that stuff was a legend. So maybe that's how she knows of Emperor Palpatine and how evil he was, and then she finds out that she's his granddaughter, so it's really shocking. So I feel like this same kind of idea could have played out with her parents still being nobodies and abandoning her, and her trying to deal with the grief of that situation, and that grief kind of spiraling her psyche into like dark thoughts and anger, instead of being, oh, I'm in danger of going to the dark side because of who my grandfather is. You know, through this whole trilogy, we have had zero indication of her turning to the dark side. You know, in The Last Jedi, when she was, you know, focusing on the Force, Luke Skywalker got freaked out because she went straight to the dark. But I always felt like that was more out of a sense of curiosity, because she always seemed like a very like curious character, you know, because she was on this desert planet for so long, so she's like curious about the universe and wants to explore and wants to see what it's all about. But no, it's just because Palpatine's her grandfather and she's worried about following in his footsteps. And so now throughout this whole movie, she's just mad Rey. So they have a lightsaber battle, which I really loved the setting of this whole thing. And I liked the kind of mental undertones it was going through, you know, with Kylo Ren kind of, I don't know, taunting her in a way. And there's a bunch of people saying, oh, she can easily defeat him in The Force Awakens, but then she gets defeated here. And I feel like they forget that Kylo Ren was just shot by a freaking bowcaster from Chewbacca. So he was like severely wounded when that happens. Do people just forget that or what? And they already did show that Rey is a good fighter, which makes sense because in the world that she was living on, there's like people that would want to steal the stuff that she scavenges, and she needs to be able to protect that, and she needs to be able to protect herself. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And, you know, lightsaber or whatever weapon, just, you know, physical combat. So I feel like she would be good at that anyway. So that always made a lot of sense to me. And here, I'm like, okay, yeah, this makes sense that Kylo Ren would beat her here because he is in tip-top shape. She's a little bit, you know, unnerved by her lineage, I guess you can call it. But the lightsaber battle in general, I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on it. I enjoyed the setting a lot. I enjoyed the kind of acrobatics and lightsaber clashing, but a large majority of it just went on too long, and a large majority of it was just Rey swinging and Kylo Ren blocking. And I was wondering why he isn't attacking, because I if I remember correctly, I feel like at this point his mission was to kill her, or maybe it was to capture her and bring her back. But anyway, we get into a big gripe that people have with this movie in Princess Leia's death scene, and I definitely agree to it in a large part. But at the same time, it's like, okay, how? I mean, it really plays into something larger, and I think it respected her character to a point. It definitely could have been executed a lot better. Even given what footage they had of Carrie Fisher, and her kind of going out in this way and playing a role in Kylo Ren's redemption, that whole idea, I really appreciate the idea of that, but the execution is what's crucial here. And it's just really, really fast. It just happens very fast. And Leia's just standing on the jungle, and she's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go die now, bye. And then Maz Kanata or somebody's like, she's gonna go die now. Oh man. And then she kind of just like appears to him and says, Ben. And then that distracts him, and Rey stabs him. And so like this, it was very fast, but in the moment I was really feeling it. I was really being swept up because this is some of the ideas and what transpired here is one of my favorite things in this movie, and it's one of the things I actually loved about it. It definitely could have been executed a lot better and paced out a lot better too, but Rey stabs him, and he has that kind of gut punch of Leia, reaching out for him, trying to pull him to the light, and then he feels that, and then he feels her passing away. Like, those are like two big gut punches in a row, and he's realizing, oh shit, like she was calling out to Ben. In this whole series, Darth Vader is a separate person from Anakin Skywalker. Kylo Ren is a different person from Ben Solo. So she was calling out for Ben, and I feel like that's really played a big part in awakening Ben Solo to eventually take over Kylo Ren. And so Rey stabs him, and he's like, oh, owie, my belly, or wherever she stabbed him. And then she heals him. Of course, there's no repercussions of healing. Like, she definitely should have passed out from this. That was a really harsh wound. And that actually retroactively, again, makes a lot of the series worse. Because, why, did she learn these from the texts? And she is the only one that's capable of doing it? Why weren't any of the other Jedi in the prequels and the other movies able to heal? Was Obi-Wan, with all of his training, he has way more training under his belt than Rey does. When Kylo Ren died, or when Qui-Gon Jinn died, so why couldn't he heal his lightsaber wound? It just doesn't make sense. So Rey just kind of leaves, and she takes Kylo Ren's ship, and I'm thinking, this must be a different ship from before, because she crashed the other ship. Okay, so I guess it's a different ship. She takes it and then burns it on the planet a little bit later. But I guess, the other heroes just decided to leave her in the middle of this battle. I don't remember that. Oh, I remember Finn yelling out to her with the giant waves. But I don't remember them leaving. But I guess they go back to the jungle planet. I can't remember. But anyway, the next scene here, if this scene didn't happen, then I probably would not have liked Kylo Ren's turn at all, because I feel like we needed an extra scene of him just kind of getting over this hump and fully transitioning into Ben Solo from Kylo Ren. And it is just like the memory of Han Solo, and basically Kylo Ren just kind of seeing Han Solo and having this exchange. And I thought it was actually rather beautiful how they used the dialogue from The Force Awakens. Some people might have thought that it was lazy writing, but I actually kind of felt completely different because it was in a completely different context. It was, Ben coming to the light instead of Kylo Ren going further into the dark. So instead of stabbing him, he throws his lightsaber away, which I thought was a really beautiful moment for his character. I do just wished it was earned more, And funny, one thing that was distracting me during this was freaking Harrison Ford looked like he just got out of bed and hadn't cut his hair in a year, because I'm pretty sure his hair was a lot shorter in The Force Awakens. Like, did the writers watch the two movies before this? Have they seen The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi? It kind of seems like it's been a long time since they've even seen it, and it almost seems like they just wrote the script on the day of shooting. Each scene that they shot, they just wrote the script for that scene the morning before shooting. You know what I'm saying? So I did really enjoy the concept and the ideas of Kylo Ren, and a lot of the execution too of Kylo Ren turning to the light. I thought that was cool. And we'll get to it a little bit later, like his atonement, so to speak. I feel like he should have atoned a lot more, and maybe even should have lived through this movie, and tried to find a way to atone. Of course, he'd probably just be a prisoner of war and probably just be in jail for the rest of his life, So anyway, we're going on to the final confrontation with Luke Skywalker, I guess. so she's burning the ship, and this is one moment that I was really hoping to get after The Last Jedi, because I felt like we didn't get enough of Luke and Rey in that movie, even though I do like what they did with them for the most part, in Luke Skywalker in general. But here, it's just the dialogue. It's just such bland dialogue, and Luke Skywalker, a lot of people are just saying like this movie is just a big middle finger to The Last Jedi. And this part in particular, I don't think it is, because she throws the lightsaber out of frustration, and Force Ghost Luke catches it, and he says, a Jedi's weapon is to be respected. And everybody that I've heard is in an uproar about this, saying, take that, Rian Johnson and The Last Jedi. And I'm thinking, did you not watch The Last Jedi? Like, Luke Skywalker had an arc in that movie, He realized that, what he was doing wasn't the way that he should have handled the situation, and that he was essentially wrong. And he admits that in this movie, that he was essentially wrong, and he, in the last movie, he got over that. Like, that was his arc. He got over that and became the Luke Skywalker that we all, wanted in that movie. But maybe it was just wasn't enough. I definitely could have used more of that, more Luke Skywalker badass. But just the dialogue in general was just very thoroughly uninteresting and very bland in this scene. And it turns out that he was training Leia to specifically be a Jedi. Now, this is something that happened in the Expanded Universe novels, and I thought it was a really cool concept. She didn't become a Jedi until a long time after Return of the Jedi in the books, though. So I kind of felt like it would have been more appropriate for her to kind of practice the Force here and there. And, that's another thing people gripe on about The Last Jedi was her surviving in space and then floating back to the ship. Yeah, that definitely was clunky and it looked really wonky. Mary Poppins, Leia. And surviving in space, very questionable, even though I do believe you can survive in space for a limited amount of time. I definitely think that scene could have been handled better, but the problem a lot of people seem to have with it is, she doesn't know. How does she know the Force? What? They explained it in Return of the Jedi that she has Force abilities. Like, you think in these 30 years she hasn't, seeked any training or practice or anything harnessing that power in any way? I thought it would make no sense if she didn't. So here they just get a full-on explanation. Like Luke was specifically training her, and then we get like a CG Luke, which looked okay. It was entirely unnecessary for them to flip their helmets up so that we could see their faces, though, because it's very obvious who they are. Luke is talking about him and Leia training, so that's who it is. Just keep the visors down. You don't need to spend a bunch of time and money showing CG faces that are not going to age well. And then Leia's face, I think they used her daughter for this, but her face and her eyes, oh my god, looked like a fish. So basically the entire purpose of this whole scene was to kind of encourage Rey and give her Leia's lightsaber, which I thought was kind of interesting, although it just kind of doesn't make sense in the context of The Last Jedi. You would think that Luke, with his philosophies in that movie, would have gotten rid of that lightsaber, though maybe he just kept it out of respect for Leia. So she grabs that lightsaber, and this whole scene was a little bit disappointing, mainly because the dialogue was just kind of bland. But I did appreciate seeing Luke in ghost form, which I was really expecting. If he didn't show up here, I would have been really disappointed. But the reasons that he gives for why she didn't become a full-on Jedi just doesn't make sense, and just makes everything more convoluted and raises even more questions. And it would have been just an easy explanation that she decided that, after going through that initial training and learning some, like, the basics, she decided that she wanted to go the more political route and make the galaxy a better place that way, which would make more sense for her character because, she's Princess Leia, and her dad was Bail Organa of Alderaan, so that would have made a lot more sense just to leave it at that, not shove in more just ideas and concepts into this having to do with Kylo Ren and his path and her path converging, or whatever, And, Rey coming here to essentially exile herself just doesn't make sense anyway. Also, given the last movie, it's like they did not watch the last movie, nor did they understand it. Like, a lot of people I think a lot of people just don't understand that movie or Luke's arc, which, I do attribute that to a lot of people just not thinking about it enough. But I also kind of attribute that to the storytelling in that movie too, because if it was done in a more efficient or effective way, then there probably wouldn't be so many people that are confused about it or confused about Luke's arc, because Luke had exiled himself there, and it made it a point to show that he crashed his X-Wing down into the water, rendering the X-Wing useless. So Rey should understand that Luke came to the realization that his way of doing things in The Last Jedi was not the right path, and that his last acts in that movie, I felt like that was clear, and that should be clear to Rey. But no, he has to come in here and just over-explain things and said, I was wrong. And I'm hearing so many reviews saying, oh, this is an FU to The Last Jedi. And I'm like, no, it's not, because Luke had the arc. He had the realization that he was wrong. So it does fit. It's not a retcon of The Last Jedi. Her doing this doesn't make a lot of sense. She didn't learn from Luke's mistakes, and she needed to have that ghost explain it to her through dialogue, which, another thing about this movie is that just there's so much explanation and so much dialogue just explaining what's happening instead of relying on the audience to put two and two together, which, The Last Jedi probably didn't do enough of. This movie treats the audience like we're idiots. Just explaining things, show, don't tell. This movie is just all tell, don't show. At least in terms of development. So Luke Skywalker, after kind of giving her a little bit of a motivational speech, he lifts the X-Wing out of the ocean, which, you know, I don't really have a huge problem with this. I mean, a lot of people I've heard complaining about this saying, why didn't he just do this in The Last Jedi and then go to whatever that salt planet was called himself? And while I was thinking about this, I thought, okay, well, he probably didn't have like the time to do that after he had his whole realization and the motivational speech that Yoda gave him in The Last Jedi. I felt like he didn't like exactly have the time, but with the pacing of this movie and with everybody just like whipping from planet to planet in a matter of minutes, he probably could have done that in that movie, but it didn't seem to have that kind of pacing in that movie, so it made sense that he wasn't able to use the X-Wing, and I had assumed that it was just basically destroyed. But nope, that this movie kind of retcons that idea from The Last Jedi and says, no, the X-Wing is just fine and dandy. It runs perfectly and is able to just get to Exegol like in a matter of minutes. It would have been nice if she had to spend some time there to repair it or make sure that it runs, because it's been there for a long time, I would assume. But anyway, she goes to Exegol. But first, we have 3PO's kind of fake out death, which the whole memory wipe thing, that whole entire story is essentially pointless because they get the knife back anyway from Kylo Ren's starship, so we don't need that information from 3PO in the first place, so we didn't need to wipe his memory. That's a giant chunk of the movie just pointless, and essentially the entire story of Rey, Finn, and Poe just going to that sand planet and finding the knife in the first place, because essentially Rey has the Wayfinder now from Kylo Ren's ship. Essentially, it's just like the plot drives the characters into this position. Granted, it was getting to the knife to trying to find the other Wayfinder that led Rey to getting this Wayfinder. Oh my god. Such a convoluted mess. But she essentially transmits the coordinates to the good guys. So 3PO gets his memory back. So, I mean, it just feels like his entire story of his memory wipe and 3PO's entire role in this story is pointless. And then him getting his memory back is pointless, as far as I remember. And, you know, why didn't you just have, like, leave his memory wiped? Like, that would at least have some stakes, even though it didn't amount to anything, but there's no stakes in this movie. Things just happen. Leia just decides to go down and die, and, you know, there's no injuries. Kylo Ren crashes his ship, no injuries. Rey can just heal, you know, mortal wounds with no repercussions whatsoever. So Rey goes to Exegol, which would be a really cool location to explore if we had the time, or if this was like in a graphic novel or a book or something like that. But having it in this movie is very fantastical. It raises so many more questions. Granted, it's probably, I am assuming it's kind of an attempt at some sort of world building here. But doing this in the third movie of a trilogy, this is where you need to start wrapping up everything that's happened, not presenting new ideas. This is like the number of ideas in this could fill out an entire trilogy in itself. And it's not something that you should present and bring up more and more questions in the third movie of a trilogy. But Rey goes to this planet to meet Palpatine. And essentially, this is just the culmination of crap that this movie has to offer. And then this final battle scene just adds a load of other questions and crap on top of it, with Rey confronting Palpatine and not really telling, like, her friends don't really know what she's doing as far as I remember. and the Resistance decides to go with their fledgling little fleets to attack Exegol instead of waiting for Lando Calrissian to get the backup that they desperately need. And the only purpose for this is so that they can have a big moment where the cavalry arrives, at the last minute where things seem dire. So again, that's kind of the idea of this movie, is that things just happen so that we can have these moments. And instead of the story servicing the characters and the characters driving the story, they just don't have any character, like any agency, and that ties in with Kylo Ren. Like, Palpatine is like, I've been every voice you've ever heard, and I've been manipulating you this whole time, and that retroactively takes away all of Kylo Ren's agency in the last two movies, because now when you go back and watch them, if you even want to at this point, you see Kylo Ren making these decisions and doing these things, and you're like, oh, that's Palpatine. That's not really Kylo Ren making these decisions. So he doesn't really have a character anymore. He's just a puppet, so to speak. So the Resistance goes in and attacks, and Emperor Sidious opens up this big dome, and it's a lot of these just like kind of take the beats of Return of the Jedi, and you kind of had this scene with Snoke in the last movie where things seem dire for the Resistance against the Final Order, and the Resistance just makes the dumb decision to go in and attack now instead of waiting for backup, and so things seem really dire for them here. And Palpatine's plan just makes no sense. Speaking of Palpatine, why and how is he so incredibly powerful? And why did he choose now? Everything revolving around Palpatine makes zero sense. Like, I have tried making sense of all his plan. It is so flippy floppy. Why did he choose now to return? After all this time, he rose how many of these Star Destroyers, these planet-destroying Star Destroyers, which is so over the top and stupid. He rose them from the ground. Why were they underground? Why were they not ready to go? Why did he choose now, of all times, to bring them to bring them to the First Order? Why does Kylo Ren feel the need to obtain these? The First Order has already taken over the galaxy with an iron fist. There's very, very little resistance to them. There, at the end of The Last Jedi, it's another retcon of that movie, that The Last Jedi was down to like 100 freaking people. So I don't feel like Kylo Ren and the First Order has any reason to take Palpatine up on this offer to take these ships, other than, Palpatine has the Final Order, so it's kind of, a challenge to the First Order's power. Now, that could have been a really interesting plot or story thread to follow, with these three powers, the First Order versus the Final Order versus the Resistance, and the Resistance could have used the tension between the First and Final Order to their advantage. But no, things just kind of happen in this movie, and Palpatine's whole plan doesn't make sense. He wants Rey dead, but then now he wants her to kill them, and I feel like the only reason they shoved this in is so that they can have like a familiarity between this and the last Return of the Jedi, with Palpatine saying, "Strike me down and you will become super powerful," or whatever. But this time it's like he wants to inhabit her body. But then Ben Solo shows up, and who knows how he got off of Endor, because Rey had taken his ship, I think. Unless I'm forgetting. He kind of shows up in a heroic fashion, and he's running, and he has a blaster, and that shows that he is Ben Solo now, because Han Solo had a blaster. Now he has a blaster, and he's just like shooting dudes. And then the purpose for the Knights of Ren's existence is finalized here with having somebody for Ben Solo to fight. And, I really loved certain aspects of this. I loved Ben Solo, his redemption and his fight with the Knights of Ren. But there's certain parts about it that I just hate. So he's fighting them, and Rey is kind of having this kind of mental struggle with Palpatine taunting her. And so the force bond between her and Kylo kind of culminates and pays off in this moment where they finally are able to manipulate it in a way to use it to their advantage. Whereas things kind of before just kind of teleported randomly, except for the necklace. And I think that was foreshadowing for this moment in this. It's such a badass moment, and I loved it. It didn't really go too far for me. But Kylo Ren is getting his ass kicked, right? So Rey passes the lightsaber back behind her head, and then it kind of like a magic trick disappears, and then Kylo Ren has it. And I actually loved, a lot of people didn't like this, but I really loved the kind of shrug that he had. He's like, hey, you know what? I'm good now, and I have an ally on my side, and we are like best buds now, even though I've been freaking mentally abusing her for 2 movies. So now that he has a lightsaber, he's just the best fighter in the world, and just easily dispatches of the Knights of Ren. And I'm thinking, aren't the Knights of Ren a part of Jedi Luke's Academy too? Do they not have lightsabers themselves? So he very easily dispatches of them, and it's so dark and the cutting is so quick that like half the time I couldn't really tell what was going on. I just knew that Kylo Ren or Ben Solo was winning. I guess that's the important thing. Forget being able to really know or see the actual action that's going on. But yeah, it was okay. It was cool. It was a cool fight, but is he nothing without a lightsaber? They made it a point to show that Rey was good at fighting without a lightsaber in The Force Awakens. So now you go to The Rise of Skywalker, and Ben Solo is just not a very good fighter without a lightsaber, I guess. So he shows up to Palpatine's office, and Palpatine decides right on the spot, you know what? I'm going to change my plan now. I'm just going to randomly suck the force or life energy out of you and become super powerful. And I'm thinking, okay, so now you're super powerful, but weren't you super powerful before? You lifted thousands of Star Destroyers out of the ground and into the sky. Like, why? Speaking of, like, these Star Destroyers can't leave the atmosphere if they don't have this beacon. And so Palpatine really wasn't ready to like use these guys, and they can't have shields if they're in the atmosphere. So why didn't Palpatine just like raise them up into space so that their shields would be ready, and so that we could have this battle in space? Why didn't you write it in a way to where the battle is taking place in space, and we would still be able to see the flashes of explosions and stuff for Rey to be able to see, and then the Resistance would have to dispatch a group down to the surface to destroy the shield generator that's generating all the shields for these Star Destroyers. And they could have explained that these Star Destroyers have their own personal shields, but they're not nearly as powerful as these impenetrable shields. There's still so many better ways to write this. So he decides to do like a Kamehameha force lightning into the sky, which, picks and chooses which ships to destroy, which to disable, and which to avoid. So while cool looking, it was, how a lot of superhero movies just got really played out with shooting the laser into the sky and creating a big, like mushroom cloud in the sky. Why did you decide to do that in this movie? It's such a played out visual. And while it was kind of cool having somebody do something so powerful, I don't really understand why the Emperor wasn't able to do this before, since he had displayed a massive amount of power earlier before this, other than, you know, needing Rey to have like a physically younger body. But I feel like if he just siphoned her, you know, used Force siphon, he would have kind of obtained the same goal, and then he could have done that to Kylo Ren earlier. So why didn't he do that? And apparently that can just regrow his fingers too. Again, things just happen just because in this movie. So during their whole struggle, we have kind of another fake out death with Ben being thrown into this random hole. So obviously I didn't think he was dead. But meanwhile, going to the fight in the sky, you know, the Resistance guys decide to use horses to run on top of a Star Destroyer. And I don't really understand how this idea got past the freaking table. You know, you think that, you know, usually when you're doing a movie, you have script readings where all the actors and directors and stuff are sitting at the table and they're reading the script. But I feel like this script was literally just written on the day of shooting, and they didn't have that. So I don't understand how this idea in general made it into the script, because it's such a dumb idea. And, you know, when it's portrayed in the movie, you're supposed to think, oh yeah, they're using like the old technology to defeat the new technology. So I don't really understand how it was so easy for them to succeed with this idea. It was really dumb, and it was a real like kind of victorious kind of moment in tone, but it just doesn't feel like it works. It's dumb. And then Rose is like, hey, Finn, I should come help too. And Finn's like, no, I don't like you that way, so you stay behind. Anyways, they're just fighting, and just Finn has a feeling, so he knows which Star Destroyer to hit, and he knows which... it's such a convoluted mess. I don't really remember everything that happened here. So, you know, they're just attacking, and things are just happening. So things are looking bad, but then... I think before the lightning, I think that's when all of the other people show up with Lando, because, you know, they're not inspired enough by Luke Skywalker, and his, you know, what he did in Last Jedi. They need Lando Calrissian. So what did he just like call him up on the phone and be like, hey, remember, I'm Lando Calrissian, the administrator of Cloud City. And, you know, I helped a little bit in the fight against the Empire 30 years ago, so join me. And they're like, oh yeah, definitely, I'll definitely do it now. Wouldn't that have been a great story to follow instead of what we got? But instead, you know, he shows up and they start getting victorious, and then Palpatine shoots lightning into the sky. And then Rey is like, I'm gonna beat you, Palpatine. He's like, oh, I'm gonna shoot this lightning at you now. Because I guess her striking him down wouldn't work now. Didn't he want her to strike him down so that he can take her? So he decides to shoot his lightning at her. She blocks it with the lightsaber. So now we've had lightning shooting, blocking with the lightsaber in... Oh, geez. That was in Attack of the Clones when Dooku shot it at Obi-Wan and he blocked it. And then, or was it Yoda? I don't remember. But anyway, and then that happened in Revenge of the Sith when Mace Windu shot it, or blocked it from Palpatine, and it reflected into his freaking face. And now he's just making the same mistake again with Rey. And she's like, oh, you don't like one lightsaber? How about two lightsabers? And for some reason, two lightsabers just adds more power. So I did actually, because, you know, she's kind of knocked out. Before this, she's kind of knocked out from getting siphoned off. And apparently that doesn't, like, kill her or weaken her enough. she's like doing her "Are you with me" thing, and I actually really enjoyed this scene with her kind of reaching out for the Jedi of the past, the dead Jedi. I do feel like it would have been really cool and more impactful, although a lot of people are saying it would have been way too stupid and fan servicey for the actual Force ghosts to show up. I feel like it would have been way more impactful if at least Luke Skywalker showed up, because of and maybe Anakin. Maybe they could have CG'd Anakin in there instead of using Hayden Christensen, even though they used Hayden Christensen's voice. I felt like that would have been great, and Palpatine would have been like, rattled by the appearance of Luke and Anakin Skywalker's voice, and that would have kind of made a little bit more sense as to why he became a little more frantic. Because then they're kind of helping Rey in this moment. But no, she just hears the voices. She gets up, blocks his lightning. Then 2 lightsabers really block the lightning. And then he just doesn't stop shooting it. It's getting reflected into his face. Now, I thought the visual was really cool of him just like being ripped to shreds by his own lightning. But apparently he just can't turn it off that easily. So he dies. And the day is saved, and they just so happen to defeat Palpatine at the exact same moment that Finn and the Resistance defeats the fleet. What a coincidence. So for some reason, Rey ends up dying from this. It's not clear why she dies. Maybe it was just so much effort blocking the lightning with 2 lightsabers that she just dies. And so the only reason this happens is so that Ben Solo can have a little bit of redemption in bringing her back to life. Now, this next part, when he takes a really long time to hug her, and I thought, okay, he's healing her now. He's gonna like close his eyes and concentrate really hard and kind of transfer his life essence into her and bring her back. But no, he hugs her for 20 minutes, and then he puts his hand on her and heals her up. And the only reason that they do this is so that she can wake up, and then he is alive just long enough, and he looks fine. He looks just fine after healing her. And I freaking cringed so hard, and they're looking at each other for 25 minutes. And I'm thinking, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. And my wife next to me is like, yes, do it. Oh, Reylo. And they freaking do it. And I'm like, why? The literal only reason they kiss is because of freaking Reylo fans. And there's so much of that in this movie. Like, oh, fans wanted this. I'm going to go on Twitter and read a bunch of what fans wanted. And I'm just going to shove it into this movie for no reason. And then after they kiss, freaking Ben Solo dies. And Rey just sits there and she's like, oh well, bye. The end. So we get very little of actual Ben Solo in this movie, and I really wish that we had more. It's just, does he even have any dialogue after he becomes Ben Solo? He's just like Kylo Ren, and then boom, he's Ben Solo and then dies. Why couldn't the movie revolve around him and his redemption and subsequent atonement? I kind of felt like this was kind of a cop-out because, it's the end of the movie, and it would leave that open to, oh, well, okay, what's going to happen with him? And that's another problem with this movie, is that it brings up so many questions for the final installation of a film. This film should have focused on Kylo Ren, his redemption, Rey and her getting over the tragic event of her family abandoning her on such a harsh world, and Ben trying to get out of the dark side and live up to the shadow of his grandparent and uncle and parents, and Rey trying to live up to finding her place in the world, like having such a powerful bond with the Force, and getting to be her own person as opposed to living up to these legends, and also living with the tragedy of her past. So and also, of course, you have the villains of the First Order and the Knights of Ren, and that could have been like such an interesting, and you have Hux too. So, I mean, like, so many people kind of use, like, reviews that I've seen use, like, this, their reviews as an excuse to complain more about The Last Jedi, but I felt like that movie left it open enough to do plenty with it. Like, you didn't need to bring the Emperor back. Snoke was not the main villain of either The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi, like Kylo Ren is. So this movie could have easily shifted it to where Kylo, like, how cool would it have been if Kylo Ren was forced to work with the good guys? That would have been such an interesting dynamic. Or if Hux had to be the spy, like Hux and the main characters. But no, we have this overly convoluted mess because we wanted to bring a nostalgic villain back of Palpatine. I don't understand why they needed to do this other than being lazy, pandering, and wanting to have some cool visuals, you know? It just, every little thing revolving around Palpatine just makes everything such a gigantic mess. It brings up so many questions. Every little tiny plot point, like, urges you to question what's going on. It doesn't flow seamlessly. There's just, like, so many holes everywhere, and it's just so disappointing. And I really wish that if this was a time issue, like, extend the release of this movie out another year. Fans might be a little disappointed by that, but they would understand. Like, when a video game is delayed, I don't feel like fans are, like, enraged about it or anything like that, because that just means they're gonna get a better product. If you want to spend more time, like, granted, a lot of times when you say, oh, there's gonna be reshoots and all this stuff, but I'm talking about the writing stage, like the pre-production of this film. They should have spent way more time in this, and it's so disappointing, especially when they're marketing this as the end of the Skywalker saga. And I don't understand why they felt the need to do that. Just so many times, like, producers and whatnot fall under this trap of, oh, we need to do this in order to reel people in. And you know what? Just focus on making a good story, a cohesive story, and a good movie. And you know what? The very first box office might not be at what you want, but if it's a good movie and a cohesive story, people will talk and praise it and will urge people to go and see it, more and more people to see it, and you'll see the box office there. But of course it's Star Wars, so it's gonna make money anyway. So maybe they just didn't care, and they just wanted to throw everything in the kitchen, everything but the kitchen sink. So after that whole battle of the, Emperor Palpatine and stuff, God, it's dumb. It's so dumb. So they have the, they go back to the jungle base, wherever that is, and they celebrate, and it's really cool. It's nice seeing everybody celebrating, and the hero, Rey, returns. They don't question what she's been up to, because I think they literally don't know what she was up to. Like, do they even know that Kylo Ren is dead? Also, oh yeah, we see just, like, really random planets. We see the Ewoks seeing a stormtrooper crashing in the sky, and one review actually pointed out that they were doing the Holdo maneuver because it looked like the visuals in the sky, somebody did it, and which completely negates the, dismissing of that battle technique, if you want to call it that. Early in the movie, they say that it's a 1 in a million shot, and I feel like, and people say, oh, well, that was stupid of Holdo, like, for doing that if it's a 1 in a million shot. And I feel like that explanation isn't like a retcon of The Last Jedi or anything like that, because if you think about it, like, you think about the position of all the ships when she did that. It was a bunch of ships chasing one ship, and there were no other allies around. So she turned around and boom, it's like just a straight shot. If we're in a space battle, like you can't do that move because you'll kill all of your allies too, So it requires a special set of circumstances to be able to pull off, and I guess that that battle in Endor, they were able to pull that off. So I don't feel like it's a 1 in a million shot, but I do feel like they could have explained that better and said like, well, we'll think about it. If the opportunity arises, we might end up doing that. So, man, so much exposition in this movie. It's just lazy writing is what it is. So Rey arrives and they all celebrate, nice scene, blah, 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 whatever. So I feel like the movie should have just ended there, but nope, we have to have a full-on other ending. We have to go to Tatooine because people remember that from the originals, and the prequels, I guess. But yeah, if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. It's not like like Leia didn't grow up there. Luke only grew up there because his freaking father went crazy and went on a giant genocidal rampage across the galaxy. But this seems like a good place to bury their lightsabers. Like you couldn't think of a better place to bury the lightsabers. Like, why don't you go out and bury it on one of the chunks of Alderaan? That was Leia's home planet, a peaceful planet, a good place. Tatooine is not a good place. Like, this place doesn't hold any special significance. And in the stupidest, like, if you remember Solo, a Star Wars Story, when Han Solo was going and the dude's like, what's your last name? Oh, I don't have a people. Oh, you're alone? That, what's another word? What's a synonym for alone? Solo. So your name is Han Solo. That's really gave me the same vibes as this scene. This random freaking lady is just trotting by. And why does she want to know Rey's name? Like, what is her reason? Is she a merchant? What is she going to do with this information? And so basically it's just like, hey audience, we have this extra scene and we think you'll think it's really cool, so we're going to say that Rey takes the name of Skywalker. And I don't have the scene in general was extremely stupid. I don't have a major problem with Rey taking up the name of Skywalker because, fuck Palpatine. Why would she want to carry the name of Palpatine? I think she should have either just said either like just Rey or Rey Skywalker, because she has a lot of respect for the Skywalkers and their name through Luke and Leia. Now, obviously, Luke, she didn't have a lot of great relations with him in the last movie, but as she knows, he kind of went back to his old self, so to speak, his inspirational, optimistic self, and of course, Leia kind of took up from where she left off to help teach her and train her after that on top of the Jedi books. So she does have a lot of respect for the Skywalkers minus Darth Vader and Kylo Ren, and of course Ben Solo was redeemed at the end and saved her life. So I don't have a big problem with it. It's just that the scene in general was really stupid and pandery, extremely pandery. But that's kind of what a large portion of these Star Wars movies, and it's just disappointing. I don't get why they can't just focus on making a good and cohesive story. They just have to shove in everything, every nostalgic, pandery piece of garbage in here. But she lights her lightsaber for no reason. Another thing from Solo, like this last scene really took from Solo. There was her like, what's your name part, and then there's her striking up her lightsaber for no reason. Because Luke's, or rather Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber was destroyed in The Last Jedi and is just magically repaired in this movie. I don't understand why she could, because there's a big time skip. What has it been, a year? Between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Luke Skywalker built his own lightsaber. Why couldn't she have her own lightsaber? Why couldn't she have this yellow lightsaber through the whole movie? That would have been so badass, I think. And also would have helped her character become her own character. Could have factored into something, but nope, she just wants to strike up her yellow lightsaber for no apparent reason other than to look at it. Show the audience what her lightsaber color is. Cool! And then we cut to credits. So that really reminded me of the last scene in Solo when Darth Maul was alive, and he's like, I'm alive and I'm a bad guy. Look, I have a red lightsaber. Such a disappointing movie. Like, there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of little things that are wrong with it that just really add up. And there's a few really big things that are wrong with it that really damage it and actually cause a lot of damage to the overall Star Wars story of these 9 films, the prequels, the original trilogy, and this trilogy. And it really makes me wish that they had just a cohesive story, and this film really could have wrapped it up in a really satisfying way, because I really liked The Force Awakens and I liked The Last Jedi enough. The more I think about that movie, the more I like it. At first when I saw it, I thought it was it's just okay. There's a lot of things that bothered me, and of course it could have gone a different direction, but for the direction that they went with, I think it was fine. I think it was pretty good. This film is either just okay or bad. And the just okay part comes from just sitting down and mindlessly watching it, because if you think about it even for a split second, you start seeing the holes and the cracks, and it just doesn't work. As a cohesive narrative, there's so many things wrong with it. It's so contrived and so forced, pun intended. So it's as a Star Wars fan, it's extremely disappointing, and it's even more disappointing when you think that this is the legacy now. This is the legacy that the Skywalkers have to live on in, and who knows, maybe they'll make some. I kind of hope that they actually make some like animated movies that fill in the gap between the originals and these sequel movies, because I think those could be entertaining, and I think that in hindsight is way more interesting than the story they decided to go into in these sequels, especially with how this last movie wrapped everything up. But I guess that's all my thoughts. Guys, if you watched all the way until this point, thank you so much. That this is coming on like almost 2 hours of me rambling. This took like 4 or 5 days of separate recording times, because I'm taking care of my daughter and she starts fussing, so I have to go like feed her or take care of her and try to hold her while recording sometimes. So thank you so much for supporting the channel and just listening to this whole thing of me rambling and complaining. And the movie itself, it was entertaining enough. The editing and the technical aspects of the editing and the pacing really took me out of it a lot, but it was just okay to me, at least until I watch it again. So with that being said, drop your thought waves down in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching, and share the video if you liked it. I really appreciate the support, and take it easy.